Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger potion.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for November 3rd, 2025, and I'm Jaded Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everyone, for this conversation. I am very, very excited to get into this one. It's a film that was somewhere among my most anticipated of the year. I don't know if it made it onto my top 10 exactly all the way back in January, but it was very much on my radar.
It was brought up. We at least talked about
Yes.
it briefly in some way.
Absolutely, it was brought up. I'm deeply, deeply excited to talk about Joachim Trier's latest film, Sentimental Value. The film made its world premiere.
Love that title. That title is almost like that kind of reflects the In Session Film Podcast in some ways.
Speaking of, you want to take a crack at the Norwegian version of the title?
Not really.
Because I have it pulled up here. It's a fun game because I have no idea. Afskan John's Verdi.
African John's Ready? Is
I don't know. I do not know.
I thought this
how
was
to say
Norwegian,
that.
not African.
Yeah,
heard you
I
just say
have no idea. It's AFFEKS. Like, that's how it starts. So, I mean, however you want to.
No disrespect to Norway, but that does not synergize.
I don't. Norwegian, Scandinavian generally has maybe the hardest pronunciations for us ignorant Americans, at least for myself.
It's so harsh, like harsh, like just like the way that like their language flows and what they actually accent. It's so interesting. I love listening to it.
It's fascinating.
It feels like I'm like widening my lens a little bit for a new cultural experience more so than anything else. It just feels so alien to me sometimes.
For sure, which is why I appreciate the translation Sentimental Value. Perfect. I can say that.
Like I said,
I like
we love
that
title. We love it. It really feels reflective of who we are as In Session Film podcasters.
Absolutely. Perhaps great foreshadowing for the review itself. We'll get to that here in a moment. Circling back to a little bit of context for the film, it made its world premiere at the Cannes Film Festival back in May, where it received a ton of acclaim, won the Grand Prix, and of course it filtered out to all of the fall festivals before landing in our lap this last week. For longtime listeners of the show, you'll already know how we feel about Joachim Trier, but for any new listeners, perhaps worth reiterating that we are pretty big fans of Joachim Trier.
Yep, he might be the best director in the world.
Yeah. Like, I do really think that he is one of, I don't know what the word is, maybe underrated. And I say that because he comes to the scene in a big way with The Worst Person in the World.
Yeah.
But I think Thelma is really good, and Oslo August 31st was one of the best films of its year as well.
Yeah. I haven't seen
he's-
Reprise from 2006.
Yeah, I haven't seen that either.
I remember liking but not loving Louder Than Bombs, but it's only been the one time I've seen it, and that was 10 years ago. So that one's probably due for a revisit. But yeah, Thelma's probably the outlier in his filmography, just given some of the aesthetic choices of it and the genre shift of that one.
Yeah.
But it's still a very effective movie, I think.
I agree. I agree. Certainly very interesting in his filmography. But I think it is quite effective. Louder Than Bombs is also an outlier because it's him working. I I'm not sure who produced that movie. I'd have to go look, but it's certainly more within the realms of traditional Hollywood.
Yeah, that
Given,
was like at that point his first primarily English language film. Yeah,
yes,
yeah. So and there may have been some barriers there, from what I
yeah,
understand.
and of course I say Hollywood loosely because I don't think it was distributed or picked up by any of the major studios by any stretch of the
Mhm.
imagination. But yes, he's working with Gabriel Byrne, Jesse Eisenberg, Isabelle Huppert in that film, David Stratham, among others. So
Yeah.
definitely working outside of his normal wheelhouse. And I think that perhaps shows in the final product because I'm with you. I think it's a good movie still. I don't think it's great. It
Mhm.
is perhaps the lesser of his movies that I've seen.
Yeah.
My least favorite, I should say more specifically.
Sure.
But generally, I think he's really, really great. I think he's a really great filmmaker, especially when he's working within the confines of his strengths.
Mhm.
And for reasons we'll talk about, perhaps he is doing that once again with Sentimental Value. Anything else that you want to note before we get into this one?
A few months ago when we did our best of the decade thus far, the 2020s specifically, we were joined by our great friend Adam Kempenar from Film Spotting. All three of us somewhere mentioned The Worst Person in the World. That's how high we
Yes.
are on that movie. I don't think it cracked any of our top fives, but it was somewhere in each of our top tens, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So that just goes to show how much we love that film in particular. And
Mhm.
as you talked about, for reasons we'll get into, there's a lot of through lines between that movie, The Worst Person in the World, and Sentimental Value. In a way, these two movies and I guess Oslo August 31st almost feel like a bit of a collective in a way.
Yeah.
I think Reprise is also kind of part of that. It's from what I understand, it's kind of a loose trilogy of sorts, but there's a lot emotionally going on between all of these films
Mhm.
that they almost feel like they might as well be in the same universe.
Mhm.
And we'll talk about
Yeah.
that further with this movie as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. Maybe this is something we can circle back to after we talk about Sentimental Value. Although, if you follow me on social media, there's no point in hiding how I feel about this film. You certainly
JD
already
hate.
know. But I do think that when we look back at his career, because he's only made a handful of features to this point, and I don't know how wide ranging his early films are in terms of um, how many people have seen them.
Yeah.
I have not seen his first two feature or his first feature or his short films. I haven't seen any
Yeah.
of those. But Oslo, August 31st, either 2011 or 12. I can't remember when it came out here in the States, but that did make my top 20 that year.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was really, really great.
Yeah.
I really love that movie a lot. And then, as you noted, The Worst Person in the World, not only in my top 10 for its year, but I think it's among the best films of this decade so far. And Sentimental Value certainly going to add to his legacy, I guess I'll say for now. So, of the 5 films that I've seen from him, I would rank them really quite highly. And he's only 6 films in. I've
Yeah.
only seen the 5, but
He's
at
got a
the
career.
rate
He's
he's
got a career ahead
going,
of him.
yes,
Yeah.
I think when it's all said and done, we're going to look back at him as one of the best of his generation. At least given his small sample size, I think there's a fair argument to say that maybe he is one of the best underrated. And again, I say that because he's only made 5 films to this point.
I think he's on an upward trajectory. I think in a
Yeah.
few years we won't be calling him underrated anymore.
Yeah.
But perhaps he hasn't fully found the audience just yet, but I think he's getting close. I know a lot of people in my life who aren't necessarily cinephiles who have seen the worst person in the world and they love it.
Yeah.
He is doing something that is, I don't want to say it's accessible because that kind of sounds like a negative buzzword when talking about foreign language films in a way. But he is very cross-cultural. I think his movies are speaking to everyone in a certain way that just adds to the universality of how he operates as a filmmaker.
I'm kind of reminded of the conversation around Tom Brady like 4 years into his career, where he had already won a Super Bowl, maybe 2, and you're like, maybe this quarterback is actually just really great. And soon he's not going to be overlooked.
Yeah.
But 4 years in, it's a small sample size. You don't know that he's going to become the greatest of all time. And I'm not saying that Joachim Trier is going to have a legacy of Martin Scorsese or Steven Spielberg, but maybe.
I mean, six films in. What was Spielberg was 6 films in? Spielberg was making what? Like
The Color Purple?
Was that? No, 6 films in. I guess that must have been what? Raiders of the Lost Ark, maybe E.T. or something.
Okay,
yeah, because he had Duel, Sugarland Express, Jaws, Close Encounters, 1941. Yeah, Raiders. Yeah. That's Raiders. 6 films in. And now he's the greatest of all time, or at least one of the greatest of all time.
And now he is. Yeah. And that's an interesting comparison too, because several of those Spielberg films that you just mentioned, those early ones, aren't highly regarded, and I don't think they're super great, especially 1941. Sugarland Express has its moments.
It's pretty good. It's okay. Duel's underrated, but
Duel's really great for sure. And then of course you got some all-timers in there with E.T. and Close Encounters. But yeah, you look at that early resume and you're like, man, this Spielberg guy, he's got it. He's got it.
Even though, I mean, thankfully, Joachim Trier doesn't have a 1941 in his filmography, and hopefully he never does.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if Louder Than Bombs is his 1941, then he's okay.
He's okay because that movie's not bad, but 1941 is one of the worst movies ever made. And yet Spielberg, it didn't affect his trajectory at all.
Not at all. Yeah, not at all. And that's what's exciting about Joachim Trier. He's only 6 films in, and knock on wood, he's able to continue making movies at a decent pace. Hopefully he doesn't have to take a Catherine Bigelow 8-10 year break unless he needs to or wants to, I guess. But if we're lucky enough that he's able to continue making movies, and he's only 51 at this point, so he's still young, he's in his prime. Hopefully we're able to get a dozen more movies out of him or more, and who's to say when it's all said and done. But I do think right now he is one of the best working at this moment. For sure. Okay. And I think that's as great of a transition as I can make it into Sentimental Value. So let's go ahead and dig into this one. The film, you're not going to believe this, is directed by Joachim Trier.
Spielberg? Okay.
It stars Stellan Skarsgård, Renate, Reinsve, Elle Fanning, Igna Lilius. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Again, see, this is where you're getting into, and I'm trying to also bring some of my hockey forte into this because Scandinavia is a really electric origin for hockey.
It is, yeah. And I sometimes hear multiple pronunciations of some of these names. Yeah, Inga Liaeus. I don't know. I know.
See,
I know.
My best guess, and again, I could be way off base here, but there are some hockey names that are like along the same lines as this. So if I'm drawing a point from A to B, and again, I don't know anything about Scandinavian pronunciations, as we've already established, so I could be way off base here. Yeah. But if I'm drawing that direct line there, my best guess is Inga Lilius.
I'll allow it.
In terms of how I should also know, in terms of how Americans and Canadians say Scandinavian names in hockey terms as well.
Yeah.
That's the Americanization of how that would be said. But I'm sure that's still way off base.
It might be. I will say I have heard interviews with I believe it's pronounced Renate Reinsve or Reinsve.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, I just watched a video with her at the Criterion Closet, which was a lot of fun. And she introduces herself as that. So I feel like I have that one down, but I don't know if I can speak to the rest.
Yeah, it's always a fun challenge.
Yeah. We're not knocking their names. We're just knocking Americans' pronunciation of those names. We're knocking ourselves. That's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Anders Danielson Lee also back working once again with Joachim Trier as well. Corey Michael Smith and a few others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Sentimental Value, it is an intimate exploration of family, memories, and the reconciliatory power of art. All right. Well said. All right, let's get into this. Brendan, what did you think about Sentimental Value?
I just got done watching this maybe a few hours ago, so I'm very fresh on this.
God bless you, Brendan, for coming into this super fresh like that.
Well, I'm going to let you guide the conversation then. I'm just going to reply to everything that you say. So thank you for being here, JD.
You're welcome.
But still being as fresh as I am on the movie, I think I can still safely say, yeah, this is great. This was great. That's pretty easy to say. I don't know what it is in international waters, but when it comes to movies about art in some way, a lot of times about movies or performance in some ways, international cinema has been knocking it out of the park. Because I was reminded a lot of movies like Drive My Car or Pain and Glory, or I guess it was last year, Close Your Eyes, which was one of my favorites of that specific year for last year specifically.
Very good movie.
I don't know what it is about international cinema that knows how to tackle this really intriguing dissection of how art and life meld together so beautifully. But Sentimental Value, I think, does belong in that conversation. I think it might be that good. And one of the reasons why I think it is so good is, I mean, it's the way it introduces itself. I think the way Joachim Trier establishes a very clear sense of place here is really profound and really beautiful. In many ways, the main character of this movie is a house. And he establishes that so beautifully in a way that is very much felt. And I think by tackling a story here about the melding of art and life and memory and what it means for actors to portray other real life people and how that can affect both sides of that spectrum, that's all really well handled. But I think the sense of place here and how universal that it feels, it made me think back to my own upbringing and the history of where I grew up, where my family grew up, where are their homes still standing? And if they were personified in some way, how would they feel about the lives that we lived and what we experienced? Would they feel the same pains as we did, the same joys that we did? Like, this is basically like that Robert Zemeckis movie Hurt Here, if it was actually good, right?
Yeah, sure.
It kind of tackles that same idea. But of course, Joachim Trier is a much more delicate filmmaker when tackling some of these themes. So this is absolutely one of the best movies of the year. And as we talk about further, we'll absolutely get into reasons why.
Yep, I will completely echo that. One of the very, very best films of this year. I am willing to admit any biases up front because Sentimental Value is the entire package for me. It is almost like a JD buffet. On one hand, it's this deeply poignant examination on the connection between parents and children and shared grief. And oh boy, you all know how much that resonates with me. And as if that's not enough, Trier expertly ciphers that idea through art and history in this boyhood-esque, all-encompassing way that gives context to the kind of trauma that defines the Borg family and how art has become their coping mechanism. Another filmmaking tactic that I've salivated over many times here on the show before. And in the end, it echoes the likes of Gavin O'Connor's Warrior, with a drunken
Interesting.
father at the center of a sibling relationship where his exploits weirdly bring them together in a beautiful moment of catharsis and finding closure. Another theme that I've rambled on incessantly about. Only this time, unlike Warrior, and I deeply love the ambiguity at the end of that film, but with this film, Trier does show us, at least in a way, what that closure looks like. And oh my God, did it do a number on me emotionally. The only way this could have been more tailor-made for me was if it was about fathers and sons and brothers, because that is my experience, obviously. But that didn't really matter because I was floored by this film. A masterclass in storytelling and weaving history and memory and art and trauma into a narrative full of remarkably nuanced characters and a rich thematic underbelly, not to mention these performances. I have no idea what this Best New Casting Oscar is going to look like, but this film should absolutely be a huge contender.
This is on point,
that category. These performances are extraordinary. Everybody is operating at their very best. I'm sure we'll talk more about that as this conversation goes. But suffice to say, this is capital C cinema. This is why we go to the movies. This is what makes art so magical. Maybe you're right, Brendan. Maybe there is something in the water in terms of international filmmaking. I don't know. But what we are seeing, how some of these filmmakers and artists are operating at this current moment in time, I am continuously feeling the ripple effect of art being crafted in this borderline profound way. And Sentimental Value is absolutely all of that and more. Again, easily one of the best films I've seen so far this year.
Well, I think it might be appropriate to say that there is something in the water when it comes to international cinema, especially international cinema that is about cinema in some way. You know, I mentioned those examples like Drive My Car and Close Your Eyes and Pain and Glory, and I do think they are apt comparisons personally, but there is a little bit of a through line in this movie about international art versus commerce and the Americanization of art. So perhaps that is kind of on its mind. Like, this movie does not like Netflix. I'll simply say that. And I appreciated that. I appreciated how direct that it was. I mean, you even get the Netflix logo at one point during one of the premieres that we see midway through this entire narrative. But yeah, I think as a movie about using your art as a form of familial reconciliation, I think it is very effective. It's not reinventing the wheel necessarily, but it's told in such a way that it almost feels like it is reinventing the wheel. And I couldn't really put my finger on it, but your opening thoughts help me pinpoint what this movie is doing narratively, you know, what its overall flow is doing. The momentum is not too far off from something like Richard Linklater's Boyhood. And I could actually say the same thing about The Worst Person in the World, Joachim Trier's prior film to this.
Sure.
His movies flow in a way that aren't necessarily broken up by scenes. I mean, they kind of are, but they don't really feel like they have a traditional 3-act structure, if that makes sense. They feel like fleeting moments kind of strung together, like they're broken up into chapters. The Worst Person in the World was very literally broken up into chapters, where Sentimental Value isn't, but we get very clear breaks.
It feels
in
that way,
between
though.
scenes. It does feel that way. And now that you say Boyhood, I'm actually looking back on that movie and I realized that the momentum of that movie is very similar to this one. And I think that allows the passage of time to feel real because you don't really know how much time has passed. It's kind of a hazy, it's very hazy in that regard. And I think that adds to this distance that these family members have with one another and why that is. So it takes a great director to know how to pace a movie to reflect what it's also doing emotionally. And this one definitely has that. And I think it's very effective in that regard.
Yeah. And I think that is ultimately where this film thrives, is in its screenplay and the storytelling here by Trier. And there are a lot of films that come to mind. I'm sure there will be more that we bring up in this conversation.
Hmm.
One name that has been lofted out there quite a bit with this film already is Ingmar Bergman. And this film
Hmm.
obviously invokes Ingmar Bergman quite a bit. You see that all over this film. But it is also contemporary and singularly Trier as well. And I think what I love most about his approach to these characters is how they are often volatile and full of emotion, but the film itself is never sentimental, which is wonderfully
Ironic.
ironic.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
really is a film that sneaks up on you. At least it did for me. I was always invested in these characters and engrossed by how Trier weaves expression and art into their trauma. But it wasn't
Yeah.
until the final 15, 20 minutes of the film where I really started to feel the weight of its emotional prowess. It is
Hmm.
quite the magic trick by Trier. And I think a big reason it's so effective is that the film never fully articulates the familial drama that led to Gustav, the father figure here, being so distant from his daughters. And I really
Yeah.
love that ambiguity because regardless of whatever happened, what we do know is that Nora had been utterly devastated when he disappeared.
Yeah.
Nora being the Reinsve character. The wounds she carries are transparent, whereas Agnes, her sister, is less hostile toward Gustav, even though it's clear later on in the film that she also has scars. In fact,
Yeah.
there's an incredible scene where she cathartically tells Gustav that being in his movie, and she is this child star that was in one of his most popular movies, and it was this incredible time for her
Yeah.
and one of her most cherished memories because it meant being close to her father. But that's exactly why it's equally haunting, as it's a reminder that soon after making the movie, he left them and it
Yeah.
tore Agnes apart. It's absolutely heartbreaking and one of my favorite scenes in the film, once again emphasizing the intimacy between familial trauma and art with these characters. I just love that Trier doesn't have to give us all of the information, and yet simultaneously, everything we need to know and understand is right there on the screen, which is what's fascinating about this new movie Gustav wants to make because it's one that he wrote for Nora, but
Yeah.
she refuses the role without ever reading the script. And that moment in the film, which is somewhat early on, it invokes a lot of questions as to what his new film could be about. At that point, we don't fully know why Nora is so adamant about not reading the script. But
Yeah.
then we get those scenes at the end of the film where everything comes together as far as Gustav's childhood experiences, how that informed a lot of his emotional baggage, which then reinforces the volatility in Nora and Agnes, and ultimately how catharsis through art is a means for healing. Gustav, how he comes off in this film, he's not someone who is going to tell you how he feels, but the beauty of art in film is that it allows us to see the world through the eyes of others, to see different perspectives, to have a conversation with the audience, or in this
Yeah.
case, his lead actress, and how Nora and Gustav communicate in those final moments, not through dialogue, but through art and expression, is truly astonishing. One of the best endings of the year. I think you can interpret that final shot in different ways. And maybe
Hmm.
this is where my own sentimental value comes in, especially
Oh,
given my
sure. Yeah.
feelings on something like Warrior. But
Yeah.
to me, I do think there is healing taking place there, at least in some way. And again, as I noted in my opening thoughts, I was floored by it.
Well, I think what's interesting about this movie and what I love about what you're saying is that this is not just a movie about art as healing, because we've seen that message many times in many movies about art, right? But I think this movie takes it a step further to suggest that some people can only heal and find reconciliation with their family in ways that they know, in the only ways that they know how.
Yeah, and that's the only way they know.
Yeah, and the only way that they know, in this case for Gustav, it is through movie making. This is the only way he knows how to connect with his family. Otherwise, there is a distance there. And that's why making this movie and trying to cast it in the way that he does is that form of reconciliation. And the movie doesn't let Gustav off the hook necessarily, but it does understand that some people only know how to find that connection in that particular way. So you understand why Nora and Agnes want to push back against that notion. They kind of see that as a bit of a selfish act from their father, only for them to realize that maybe this is the only way that he knows how to connect with us, and this is his way to make an attempt at those amends. And I like that the movie is suggesting that you find amends in the only way that you know how. Like I think of myself, like it might not be movie making for me necessarily, but if I had a family member that I was distant from, but we had a shared love of music, that might be the only way I know how to connect with them, right? Like everyone has their own different vices, if you will, their different passions of how you connect with people. And this movie suggests that that's kind of human nature in a way. And I do think that's very provocative.
I agree. And I think that's what's so fascinating about the Rachel character here played by Elle Fanning. And I think Elle Fanning is also really, really great here.
This
Maybe
might be
underratedly so.
Honestly.
Yeah, she's really great. And for context, although many of you listening have already seen this film, but for those that haven't, she's an American actress that has fallen in love with Gustav's previous films, particularly the one that involved Agnes when she was a little girl.
Yeah.
And so she's wanting to collaborate with Gustav. And because Nora has refused this leading role in this new movie that he wrote, as I mentioned earlier, Gustav, reaches out to Rachel to perhaps take on this role. However, and maybe some spoilers here for the rest of the conversation, but given where this is going, I do want to say this. So some slight spoilers here, just a heads up. But I think what's so fascinating about Rachel and how it tethers to exactly what you're talking about there, Brennan, is that in the end, what Rachel is representative of is that you can't manufacture the healing. If the art isn't genuine, it's not going to work. And I think that's also what's so fascinating about those secondary, admittedly, but those ideas here of commerce versus art and the Netflix commentary that you've referenced earlier.
Yeah.
Because that also plays a role in this dichotomy of art acting as a tool for healing, which is why Gustav wrote the film. It's why he wants to make this movie. It's why he wants to do it specifically with his daughter. But because those cards, at least initially, are not on the table, he has to go to Rachel. He has to go to Netflix. And what does Netflix want to do? They want to mingle in the middle of this. They want to have their say, and that disrupts the creative process with Gustav. He can't bring on his longtime cinematographer. He has these other elements that are outside of his control that are getting in the way of what he really wants to do. And those elements here aren't just acting as commentary, although the art versus commerce thing is interesting, but really what they're doing is acting as this metaphorical wedge as it relates to the healing process, how art is a major tool in that, and you can't force it. You can't manufacture it. It's got to be something that is done from a place of purity.
And Rachel very openly calls him out on that. She says, "This is not working, and I know you know it." I appreciate that character has that type of arc and that type of resolution, because the Rachel character could have easily gone down the May-December route. like she could have been the Natalie Portman of this movie. And she does not do that. There's a lot more humility in Rachel when it comes to that
Yes.
recognition that you're talking about. I do think it is very well handled. And you're right. There is a
and she's
through line
brilliant.
with,
Fanning is so brilliant in
like I
that.
said, I think this might be her best performance.
It
And
really might be.
yeah, she's a wonderful actress. I mean, everyone's giving stellar work in this movie. There's no best performance. You're right that this is perhaps the greatest example we can think of how the best casting Oscar should be utilized. And I think this is a great example of that.
And I think what's also so fascinating about those May December isms in Rachel is that, unlike that film, which is obviously acting as a melodrama, for Rachel, she's coming at it from a place of purity. She does want this to work. She is very earnest in wanting to do right by the role.
Yeah.
But because she doesn't have any sort of attachment to the place, and sense of place is significant here. I completely agree with you. In fact, I do want to expand further on what you talked about in your opening thoughts. But she doesn't have any sort of tethering to this place.
Yeah.
And she doesn't have the accent. She doesn't have the experiences in this landscape. And she struggles to connect to the character as a result. But she is trying.
She does
try the accent. She does invest in getting to know the place.
She changes her hair as well. She does physical change, which I guess that was Gustav's suggestion to change her hair. So then all of a sudden we're getting a little bit of like Hitchcock's Vertigo vibes happening here.
Yes. Yes. But it's all indicative of Rachel taking the role seriously, approaching it in earnest, and wanting to do what's right for the art. But as you noted, she recognizes that it isn't working and approaches Gustav about it. And I love that response from Gustav where he says something to the effect of, "You're a good person," in reference of her coming to Gustav personally to confront him about it instead of letting the agents work it out.
Yeah.
She cared. And by her personally approaching Gustav, you can see that one, he recognized the truth in that. He doesn't push back at all, even though he does care for Rachel. And it's a really incredible scene in the film where the facade of what they were doing, even though it was all coming from a place of honesty, the truth is it wasn't working because there was only one actress that could do that role, because it was written very specifically for her. So either Nora does the role or the movie couldn't happen.
Yeah.
Even though Gustav still tried to manufacture it, but in the end, the healing that is supposed to come out of this can only be done from an organic place.
Yeah. And we do get, I don't want to say a revelation, but a revelation of a sort as to why Nora is the one that needs to play this character in this movie. We find out a little bit more information probably around the third act. Like there's not really acts in this movie, but somewhere around the, I don't know, maybe 100-minute mark, if I were to guess. And the movie does treat it like a reveal of sorts, but it does add context, emotional context, as to not only why Nora needs to take on this role, but something that they never knew about was, even despite their father not being in their lives for much of their time as children, he yet somehow knew everything that happened to them. Somehow he was still present. The movie doesn't answer how that is. It's almost like he was this,
ambiguous.
It's almost like he was this living ghost that just never left, even though he wasn't physically there. And that revelation is ultimately why the movie goes the way it does. And I love that simple gesture, that simple notion that physical distance doesn't necessarily mean emotional distance. Sometimes we just process our connections with people in different ways. Sometimes it's through art, in the case of Gustav here. And Gustav has to learn about that connection just as much as his daughters have to learn about what that means too. There's a two-way street.
Well, and I think that's where this film being about places is also really important, because that's where the narrative kind of ties all of that together. Again, without spoon feeding the audience, but sense of place, I do think is quite vital to what you're talking about. And I do love that much of this film takes place in the family home and how it evokes place as this tangible connection between history and trauma and memory. It reminded me a lot of Lady Bird in that way. But the big difference here is how Trier funnels that idea through art and performance, as we've been talking about. Gustav essentially wants to make his Fabelmans. It's funny that we brought up Spielberg earlier, but that is essentially what Gustav is doing.
I did not think about that. That is a great comp. That's a great comp. You're absolutely right there.
Yeah, he wants to recreate and recontextualize his memories and how they're all connected to this family home, which becomes its own character, as you talked about earlier. Something Trier emphasizes in the opening sequence of the film, where we hear voiceover narration talking about the home being happier with its quote unquote belly full of life, people inside the home, or if it feels pain when its windows are slammed. Trier also denotes through time how it's formed cracks on the walls, the paint has eroded, the brick has started to crumble. So as the film becomes this meditation on family and memory and legacy and sentimental value, we see how place is a vital component in holding emotional power in our lives and connecting us to those things. And there's some great irony to that, given the final scenes of the film and how place shifts. I'll say vaguely, although we've already kind of gone into spoilers here, but we do come to see that the home is modernized. The film that Gustav eventually makes, it's done on a film set away from the actual home. And I think that ties wonderfully to what you're talking about, because yes, Gustav does leave. Again, we don't know the details. We just know after a certain amount of time, there's conflict with his wife, he leaves. And so he doesn't know exactly, at least one can assume he doesn't know, but the way this film treats this home as a tangible character that can feel, that can think, that can reveal its own secrets, one can, I guess, point a connection between that idea and how Gustav ended up knowing about Nora and the things that happened to her and to Agnes.
It's almost telepathic in a way.
Oh, exactly. And I love that idea. Like that connection here, again, without spoon feeding, again, going back to the screenplay and the storytelling, I just think it's utterly brilliant.
Yeah, there's almost like a bit of magical realism without utilizing magical realist filmmaking tactics, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's all thematic, but it works.
I think that's what makes Joachim Trier such a great filmmaker, because he did a lot of the same things in The Worst Person in the World. I mean, there was one sequence in that movie where he did employ some pretty literal magical realism, which was the stopping of time sequence.
Great scene. Yeah.
A great scene, absolutely. Very much the centerpiece of that movie. But that utilization of like thematic magical realism, as you put it, is very much all over The Worst Person in the World, and it's very much all over this film. It's very much felt, and I also love the way that he telegraphs certain things for us, so that we're prepared for when things are about to happen. We see a lot of one take sequences in movies, right? Because we see so many of them. Like, there was a time like 10 years ago where if you saw a one take sequence, it's all everyone talked about, right? Now it's like every filmmaker tries to do it. It's kind of become like white noise. But I don't think I've ever seen a movie telegraph a one take sequence by telling you exactly how it's going to happen at some point, when it's going to happen, so that when it does happen, you're looking for everything that's already been telegraphed for you. And then you notice how it's slightly different. And then that slight difference is what makes it for you. That was really clever writing there.
Oh, it's brilliant. And it's incredible how that scene that you're talking about encompasses this entire conversation as it relates to where this is taking place. Again, the irony of the film set. But the first time we see it, the foreshadowing that you're referencing is in the family home.
Yeah.
Gustav walking us through the shot. And who's he walking it through with? It's with Rachel. So there is a bit of a disconnect because it's being told to us. But when we actually see it in action, and of course, as we noted, Rachel ends up not doing the role. When we see it in action, there's so much more of an emotional punch to how that plays out, given the storytelling and leading up to that moment with Gustav, the girls, that the revelation of Nora that you're talking about there. And again, I'm reminded a little bit of Warrior and how in that film, the father figure in this almost indirect way brings those brothers together, and they have that moment in the ring. And we do see something similar here. If you've seen the poster, you know exactly the image that I'm talking about of the two girls laying on the bed and they're sharing a moment. That happens at the end of this film. That is the Warrior-esque brothers in the ring walking out
That's the
together.
money shot. That's the money shot of it, yeah.
100%. And it's brilliant how, again, Gustav is removed, much like we see in Warrior. And it brings them together in this incredible way. Now, ultimately, again, as I noted in my opening thoughts, we do get to see a little bit of closure.
Yeah.
Which Warrior doesn't give us. But I love what this film does with that closure, because again, I still think it's full of ambiguities. And again, with how it ties everything together, what we see is Gustav back together with his cinematographer. And I love that visual because the film doesn't tell us how that came together, but he's there. So one assumes that from an artistic perspective, the purity has come back to its nucleus, which makes sense given that Nora is involved, that that also I can't remember the character's name, but the son.
Oh yeah, Eric, I believe that. I think it's Eric. Yeah, it's Eric. Evan is her husband, is Agnes's husband.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember the name of the son, but that is important as well because Agnes, like her artistic collaboration with her father was when she was a kid. So the fact that her son is now working with Gustav, it kind of brings everything full circle, generationally speaking. And this film in a lot of ways is about generational trauma. And we see that through imagery, we see it in the storytelling. And so for everything to crystallize the way it does in that final sequence, to what you're saying, completely delving into the shot that was laid out beforehand is just incredible.
It's I love when movies can telegraph certain things for you so that you're prepared for when they happen. It's kind of like we're making a lot of strange comparisons to this movie, but I feel like it's all in good faith. It's to utilize how certain examples are done in other movies, so that way we can sort of better articulate why it works here. But I was also reminded of the early scene in Titanic when the one character is talking to old Rose about how the ship sank and they use a digital creation to recreate it.
Oh, sure.
So that way, when it actually happens in the back half of the movie, you're ready for those individual moments to happen. That's kind of like how the explanation of the one take sequence is here. It's sort of similar, but it's done in a more ironic way because we know that now that the casting has changed, we're seeing everything telegraphed for us as we expected, but we're also ready for the one shoe to drop that's going to be different. And that's smart storytelling right there, I think.
No, it's incredible. And again, as it relates to not just tethering all of its through lines together, and I think it does that brilliantly, but specifically the closure for Nora and Gustav, I was deeply, deeply moved by it. And again, I think what's so great about it is that there is not a moment of verbal exchange between the two characters.
It's very similar to the ending of The Worst Person in the World, where you get some emotional closure, but the actual closure itself is still kind of unclear. You definitely get
Yeah.
that here.
Well, I think it depends on how you interpret it. As I
Right.
mentioned earlier, I think there are very much there's more than a few ways that you can interpret it.
Mhm.
But for me, it's the close up on the eyes of the characters. Again, they are communicating,
Yeah.
but they're communicating through art,
Yeah.
through film. That's how they communicate. That is their love language, the both of them. In various ways, obviously, and there is a duality between them because Nora, as established early on, she is mostly known for her work in the theater.
Yeah.
And Gustav doesn't really like the theater. He is a
Nope.
filmmaker. I am a filmmaker. I don't do the theater. And so that creates
It's all about
conflict
films. It's like
between-
I believe that young children should be watching movies like Irreversible and The Piano Teacher.
that's such a great moment in the film.
One of the funniest scenes I've seen all
So
year.
funny. That is absolutely hilarious. Yes. Loved that visual. That was absolutely incredible. But yes, he is a capital F filmmaker. Nora is a music theater nerd.
Yeah.
And so there is conflict, but they do come together at the end because that is their love language. And while they don't say anything to each other directly, they do communicate through their art, through the filmmaking, her performance,
Yeah.
the movie that they're making, why they're making this scene, what it says emotionally, given their familiar history, why it's taking place in their family home, albeit a manufactured one, for some of the reasons we mentioned earlier. But that communication, and again, I just love that overhead shot as the credits begin to roll, where again, they don't talk to each other. He has called cut. I do think they embrace. I think there is a hug, but they don't really talk. And then little Eric comes up and gives his grandpa a hug, and that's how it ends. It is gorgeous.
Yeah.
It is beautiful. To me, it's indicative that healing is at the very least beginning to take place. That they are moving in a direction where some sort of healing can take place. Perhaps a relationship can be had in the aftermath. I don't know. I'm choosing to read it that way because of the performances there and how Joachim Trier shoots those actors in that final sequence there. But either way, I found the filmmaking there incredibly redolent.
There actually isn't a hug between the two of them. The hug is only between young Eric and Gustav, which honestly
I wasn't sure.
But yeah, they're actually, that does add nuance, and I think necessary nuance. As far as my reading on the ending, I am in line with you. I do sense more of a hopeful conclusion that at the very least, this is. I like endings that suggest a work in progress for characters and not a finalized reconciliation, if that makes sense. But this does suggest a work in progress for this relationship. I love when movies end that way because that feels more real. I mean, I feel like every relationship in real life is kind of a work in progress, right? And this is a reflection of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's very much a work in progress. Even the hospital scene, while Gustav is recovering there and he's making jokes with the nurse, and you see his daughters laughing again, it evokes a hopeful spirit, and then it leads into that final sequence where they do the shot that was foreshadowed earlier in the film. And again, even though they don't speak to each other there, the way they communicate through art, it does invoke something hopeful, but at the same time, it's not like they're holding hands and singing Kumbaya. Like it doesn't give you that sense of, okay, everything is all hunky-dory now and it's a fairy tale ending. The film doesn't suggest that either.
Right.
It is perhaps a little bit murky, but I think there's enough there that you can sense healing starting to take place in some way.
Yeah, and that's what matters.
That's what matters. And I think because of the staging of it, the very literal staging of it, and what that means as far as sense of place in this film. And again, how the film builds to that moment through characterization and the kind of ups and downs we see with these characters. It is quite emotionally riveting. At least it was for me.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Definitely one of the best movies of the year.
I deeply loved it. I guess before we get out of here, I do want to emphasize something I said in my opening thoughts. The performances here are astounding. Stellan Skarsgård is out of this world. He's
terrific.
Really
He's
quite
absolutely
remarkable
terrific in this.
I think there's an argument to be made. This is his best performance. I don't know.
He's been active for a while. He's got a hell of a resume.
Oh, he does, and I understand the recency bias there, and that's where I do hesitate because I just saw this a week ago. But again, my jaw was on the floor. I think he is so incredible here as this complicated father artist figure. He is clearly embroiled in ego and longing and regret and suffering. And that's what I love about the context of this film, because it does establish that Gustav did not grow up with the happiest of childhoods either.
Right.
There was a lot of trauma that he experienced in that same house. And he does channel that into his art. And it's, of course, a reflection of his own baggage that he brought into his marriage and then ultimately into the relationships with his two daughters. And I do think we see that throughout this film in countless ways. And it's sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's subtle. And I also love that sometimes, despite the conflict, there are some really charming, fun moments in this film. One of my favorite shots, one of my favorite moments in this movie, and maybe it's because it evokes a little bit of the worst person in the world, but I deeply loved, and this goes back to the birthday party scene that we laughed at earlier, where Gustav he gives little Eric the funniest gift ever. But after that, he goes outside with Nora, and the relationship at this point is still incredibly thorny, to say the least. But they go outside and they smoke a cigarette together. Nothing is said. The camera just lingers on them for about 30 seconds. And there's something about that shot. And again, the way they communicate, they can't communicate verbally. Anytime they talk to each other through words, bad things happen. But they can at times communicate non-verbally. That was one of my favorite shots of the film. And again, it's Trier just letting these performers carry the movie, do so much of the heavy lifting. And I love what Skarsgård brings to this film as Gustav. And I could sing the praises of Renate Reinsve all day as well. She is striking, stunning, gorgeous here as Nora.
I agree. Kind of developing a bit of a crush on her, I must say.
I mean, she is unbelievable here as Nora as well. And I love, again, I don't know how to pronounce it, Inga Lilias.
Oh, she's terrific. Yeah. I didn't really know much about her going into
really
this.
Good. Like, just so good. Just stunning. And, we mentioned Elle Fanning, who gives one of her very best performances as well. Everyone is on their A game. If this isn't a contender, if this is not a nominee for best casting, then I just don't understand what we're doing with the award.
Well, it should be a contender for a few things, not just best casting, but one thing I want to call out as we wind down this conversation, it should be in the conversation for best editing, because part of the reasons why like that scene you highlighted worked so well, it's because of how smooth the editing is, the effortless transition of that dialogue-less exchange that both Nora and Gustav have with each other over a smoke, only to then enter the party, back at the party, and then the adults have their conversation that leads to a bit of a breakdown, an emotional breakdown from Nora. She runs out of the party, crying her eyes out, only for her to start crying against this bed, and you find out, oh, this was an audition.
Yeah, brilliant. That's a brilliant
absolute
moment. Yes.
brilliant uses of transition here and the editing.
Yeah.
And I have the editor's name up here, but I do not know if I'm going to pronounce this right. Olivier Budge Coute.
Yeah.
That is probably way wrong, but I want to try to give credit where credit is due because the editing here is really good.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And there are a couple of times where you get that. And also there are moments here where the film flashbacks to tell us context as it relates to Gustav's background, what happened to his mother. And all of that is necessary because this film is about this home. It is a tangible character, as we talked about. And so the film wants to give us its history. It wants to tell us about the characters that inhabited this space and how that ultimately leads to generational trauma. So that passage of time is quite vital.
Yeah.
And the editing and complementing the storytelling there is incredibly sharp and crisp. I completely agree with you. And while the performances in the screenplay will likely get most of the notoriety with this film, the editing is really important. And just generally, the cinematography is really great. I think it is
it's
an
subtle.
Incredibly well shot movie.
Yeah, it doesn't call attention to itself in a way like a Terrence Malick movie.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, but it's like sometimes great cinematography is not about how gorgeous a movie looks, it's how appropriately framed certain sequences are. And I'd say this is definitely the latter. On top of the fact that there are some beautiful shots here too. There are some shots on the beach between a few characters that are very painterly in their own way.
No, I love the visual language here. I think it's incredibly complementary to the film's themes, characterization, again, the ups and downs of what they're experiencing. Like, I think the cinematography is incredibly complementary to all of that, not to mention the one taker you get at the end of the film, which has, it's this incredible emotional catharsis. Yeah. And you need the cinematography there to work wonderfully to complement that foreshadowing. And I think it does that perfectly. And also to speak to the editing one more time real quick, to something we said earlier, the film is essentially broken up into chapters, and the editing does a great job of making that feel like a feature to this film.
I agree.
Not something that's jarring and out of place.
I'm with you.
So yeah, the craft all around is just astonishing. The screenplay and performances will get the most love. They'll probably get the nominations and awards, but the craft all around is truly incredible. And I do hope, to your point, because this won't get any love from a cinematography perspective, but if anything else gets any attention, I really do hope the editing is perhaps a nomination.
Yeah, I agree.
The Oscars.
I agree.
And I would not be surprised if Skarsgård, Reinsve, and Fanning are all nominated. I would not be surprised.
Has Fanning ever been nominated yet?
I don't know.
I don't think she has.
I did not look that up beforehand. Maybe. I don't know. I don't think so.
I don't think she has.
Yeah.
I'm trying to look this up in real time.
Yeah. But I could see all three of them getting nominations here. And that's nothing against Inga Lilius, who I think is equally deserving. I don't know if all four of them could end up getting nominations. I think of those four, she's probably the one likely to miss. But I think all four are deserving.
Yeah.
They're all really, really good.
So Elle Fanning has not been nominated yet. The reason why I was second guessing myself was because I forgot if she had gotten nominated for A Complete Unknown. And then I remembered that she was probably the one that should have gotten nominated from that movie.
Oh, okay. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I really do hope that all four maybe get a nomination. But again, I say that without actually doing any of the math in the sense that I don't have a list in front of me of other other performances that I would also like to see get nominated. That's just not in front of me. Maybe there are other supporting actresses that I would also want to get in. I don't know. That's an exercise for later. But like in a vacuum,
we still have a lot to watch yet. But
and
yeah,
I have
at
a
this
lot to
point,
see
no.
yet.
Yeah.
But in a vacuum, I'd love to see all 4 of them get nominated. And the screenplay here, I would be shocked if it doesn't get a nomination.
I think it's kind of a shoo-in at this point.
It's got to be a shoo-in. I think the film will probably get nominated for Best Picture. Hopefully editing as well. I mean, I think this probably will be a major front runner.
Yeah. I want to point out something funny because you mentioned a lot of reviews out there have made the comparison to Ingmar Bergman with regard to this movie. And I do think that's a pretty fair comparison. Tonally, there are some similarities there. But I was looking at the cast list, and there's an actor by the name of Lena Andre, who I guess is she plays the actress who is going to be playing the Elle Fanning's mother, right?
Oh, yeah,
So, yeah. Her character in this movie is named Ingrid Berger.
That's not subtle at all.
I didn't know that. Just happened to look it up. It's like, okay, that's clearly Joachim Trier is wearing his influences on his sleeve a bit.
That's very funny. Yeah, and look, that's okay. I mean, a lot of people have brought Bergman up a lot with this film, and I definitely see it. It really is all over. But I love how he takes that influence and again brings it to this in this contemporary way that's also just in line with his filmmaking ethos, especially with what we've seen over the last few films.
Sure.
It's astonishing. Yeah, easily one of the best films of the year.
Good stuff.
I really love it.
Good stuff.
Yeah, great movie. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. See it as soon as you can. And again, just I guess my last note on here to circle back to the conversation at the beginning of this. The Worst Person in the World, I think, is one of the best movies of the decade so far. Sentimental Value, I don't think, is terribly far behind. I think this will end up being one of the best films of 2025, meaning I think he's got 2 of the best films of the decade to this point in some variation. Again, I haven't done that ranking, but somewhere in that conversation. And Oslo, August 31st, I think, is one of the best films of its year. So of the 5 films I've seen, 3 of them I think are like borderline top 10 if they're not. 2 of them for sure. Oslo, I'd have to reshuffle that 2011 list or 2012. Again, I'm blanking on which year it came out here in the States, but regardless, it's in the conversation. Those 3 films are great. And Thelma and Louder Than Bombs, again, good movies.
He's good at his job. Very good at his job. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. I think he's operating at an extremely high level at the moment.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay. With that, if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. We have another review out this week as well. Brendan got together with the great Megan Kearns to talk about Begonia. I have not seen the film yet. I was gone over the weekend, took my son to Michigan, so I have not seen that film quite yet. I'm hoping to catch up with it very soon, but you can listen to that conversation. Really lovely as always. And then the main show this week, episode 661, I believe we're at.
That's it. It
is going to be a catch-up episode. Brendan and I are going to talk about some films that we missed earlier in the year, that we've caught up with, that we want to give some thoughts on. So you can be on the lookout for that. A lot of films, going to have to figure out which ones I just had to bring to the show.
Yeah, you'll have more than me, so it might be one of those cases where I ask you to hold on a few of them because I know I'm going to see them eventually. But
For sure.
at the very least, I think we're going to have, like, I'm looking at my list here, we'll have at least 5 that we could collectively talk about, that's already enough.
That's a fair amount. Yeah, that's a fair amount. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we'll talk about that. I also have a really fun topic I'm going to open the show with. It's a mystery box. Brendan has no idea what I'm going to talk about, but
I love how you do this.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good, and it's going to be a little bit of an out of nowhere thing.
Okay.
Like, it's unique. In some ways, it won't be surprising once you hear what it's about, but the origin of it is going to be out of left field. I'll just say that.
I can't wait. I can't wait now. I'm counting down the hours to record that episode.
So that should be fun. So be on the lookout for all of that. A lot happening this week. New women in session at the end of the week as well. They've been doing such a great job. Keep an eye out for that as well. All right. With that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We will see you all next time on the In Session Film Podcast.